a bit about Jinh-Yu's background, how you guys met, kind of how everything unfolded, and where you guys are now.
Our screen's not big enough.
See if I can go this way. There we go.
Hey.
Yeah. So give me your first question, Brian.
So basically, how did you guys meet?
We're both originally from a city called Amarillo, Texas, in the Panhandle. And 2008, I had just turned pro, and it was my second professional fight. And I happened to be fighting in my hometown, in our hometown, while we were living in separate places in Texas. I was in Arlington, she was in Lubbock, and she had a teammate on the card, and I hit on Jen at the weigh-ins while I was emaciated and dried out and just looked like absolute shit. And but I won my fight the next night and went to the little after party, and Jen was there, and we kind of just hit it off, man. And the next day she ended up going back home. I ended up flying back home, and I didn't even get her phone number. I'd forgotten to, but she hit me up on MySpace to say what a nice guy.
This is showing my age too.
Yeah, so from there on, it was like every other week, one of us was either driving the 6-hour drive or taking a short flight to each other. And about 6 months later, she ended up moving in with me, and snowball effect of relationship.
And for all those youngins out there, MySpace was like the original social media platform.
Yeah, I know this. So
yeah.
Where, Jinh-Yu, where were you in your career at this point?
I think I had just had my first amateur fight, and I was about to have my second. So I was already fighting before I met Douglas.
Yeah.
But it's still pretty early on.
You know the KO that you got real famous for?
Mm-hmm.
Where in the time scheme of things was that in relation to when you guys met?
That was probably 5 years prior to that. Yeah, so it was a decent amount of time.
Yeah, the knockout was in 2013. That was her second professional fight. She was defending her belt that she had won in her pro debut, and this was a second pro fight that had that KO heard around the world.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm real intrigued with is when you guys first got together. Obviously, you shared the love for fighting in MMA. At what point did you start coaching her?
Immediately. Now, the coach that she had in Lubbock was fighting professionally at the time as well, but he didn't really have anything as far as wrestling or jiu-jitsu. He was just an old savvy kickboxer, and what he did is he instilled pretty good kickboxing in his team. So as soon as Jen and I got together, I grew up wrestling, and so I had to stress the importance of how much time you need to put into wrestling to become a mixed martial artist. And so the coaching began almost immediately.
He's like, no, it didn't. So, Jinh-Yu, I guess my question for you is, what surprised me was when I found out about your university qualifications and your academic background.
Mm-hmm.
So, what made you decide to be a professional fighter and not pursue what you could do with your academic background?
Well, I actually worked full time at a hospital, like in nuclear medicine.
Yeah.
And the fighting was just kind of a hobby, and it was just something that I did, because I enjoyed it. And I actually didn't even expect to go and fight professionally. I was just going to fight as an amateur. It was just getting really difficult to find fights. Every time I would reach out to a promoter, that sort of thing, they never really had anybody. And there was one promoter that we were talking to, and he said he had tried to find some amateur girls, never could, but he did have someone who was pro. So if I wanted to compete, I would need to make the jump and go ahead and fight professionally. So I did. And then even still at the time, I was like, I'm just doing this for fun. I even got signed by Invicta, but it was still kind of just for fun. And then I actually applied to graduate school, And I was like, well, I'll just fight until I get into graduate school because I didn't know how quickly I would get in, but I got in pretty quick, like immediately. So then I was like, well, I could probably juggle graduate school and full-time work and training. So I'll just fight until I finish graduate school.
Yeah.
And then by the time I finished graduate school, I was like, I was the number one contender for the Invicta Atomweight title. So then it was kind of like, well, should I stop now? It's like, I'm so close to winning this title. So, it took quite a bit of time. Like, we deliberated on it for a while. And finally, Douglas actually convinced me to go ahead and put the career aside and, try fighting full time. And here we are.
Yeah, and just to note, like a couple of details on that is in 2016, Invicta had a show in Vegas, and Jin was paired up against a really good Brazilian fighter. She was the ex-champion. Her name was Erica Tiburcio. Her name is Erica Tiburcio, and she was coming off of a win against Michelle Watterson, and then she lost her belt ultimately to Yokohama Saki. But Jin beat her by unanimous decision and became ultimately the number one contender, like she mentioned. And so we kind of looked at what it was going to take for her to quit her job and us be able to afford her becoming a full-time professional fighter versus part-time training. And we made some moves. We ended up selling our house. We were able to make some good money. We downsized, bought a much smaller house, and got our finances in order to where we could afford it to chase a world championship, and it happened. We were able to make it work, and then ultimately now here we are, and she's signed to the UFC. And I honestly, I don't think Jin ever saw it coming. I did. I foresaw it. I wished for it. I wanted it to happen. And yeah, it came to fruition.
Yeah. So I guess my question for you is, at that point when she was able to fully commit to training, did you obviously come up with the regimen and things like that with like everything she was going to do?
I had a pretty big part of it. We did have a few other coaches that were involved as well, because I was still fighting as well. Oh. But we were with a team called Team Takedown for several years, and that was the old Johnny Hendricks and the Rochelle brothers and Chaz Skelly and the names go on and on. But we had a really incredible program. So the coaches within that, Coach Kenny Monday, who was an Olympic gold medalist and world champion wrestler, and then Mark Lehman, who was just an incredible jiu-jitsu player in his time, and then Stephen Wright, who he's doing some massively good things as far as an MMA and kickboxing coach now. But we got to work really closely with them, so they were taking a big part of it. Everything as far as the conditioning aspect. I got to mention Adrian Ramirez as well, the strength and conditioning coach, goes by ARAM. Yeah, he's we were able to have good coaches in place to help out whenever I was like in camp and working towards a fight.
So at what point did you kind of decide, okay, maybe I should get into coaching full time?
2014. That was my last fight, November 2014 in Trinidad and Tobago, and that was my 30th fight. And I had an up and down record, about a 50-50 record with wins and losses. I just couldn't always put it together on fight night, but I knew that I always wanted to turn it into. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted mixed martial arts to be part of my life forever. And so what better way to do it than my wife to be kind of like my cornerstone for it. And and so that was when it happened. I kind of veered away from mixed martial arts in general, like coaching to the public. I had taken some certifications for strength conditioning. Got really involved with the company On It in Austin, Texas, and so my first career as a coach was I was teaching small group training sessions, personal training sessions that was just fitness, and occasionally people would pay me to like hold mitts, hold pads, And then, let's see, it was 2017, about 3 years ago. I was offered a full-time position as a coach at a jiu-jitsu school where there was no MMA program. And the coaches there, they saw something in me that I could build a program. And yeah, so that full-time MMA coach started 3 years ago.
So yeah, I guess that kind of answers the question there. So when you took that full-time position, Jen, where were you training? Were you training at the same place or a different place?
I was training at the same place, and then Doug was kind of just overseeing my training. Like, he was just focused on me and kind of traveled wherever I went, so he could kind of oversee all the girls, put together our training, that sort of thing, make sure that we had plenty of attention on us, specifically myself. And then he got offered the full-time position to oversee or build a whole program there. So at the time, he was kind of just traveling wherever I was going for training.
Okay. So Doug, do you have other coaches there as well that you delegate to do certain things?
Yeah, certainly do. And one of them he's key. It's our jiu-jitsu coach. His name's Eric Lincoln. He runs the no-gi program at Genesis Jiu-Jitsu in Fort Worth, and he's my right-hand man when it comes to putting together stuff and helping the coaching the athletes out, including Jen herself. I am now going to be incorporating a little bit more. I'm going to be speaking with Stephen Wright again, and he's just an amazing kickboxing coach specifically. But to work with him and get more hands-on that know Jen and can continue helping her evolve.
So do you find that obviously as the head coach, you're kind of the glue and you have to put everything together? Because obviously, separate disciplines like jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and stuff, they have to be molded for MMA.
Right. Yeah. So I call it the blends of being able to put it all together specifically for an MMA. Because there's a lot of things that you do learn on a jiu-jitsu mat or wrestling mat or in Muay Thai or kickboxing that won't necessarily transfer over very well into mixed martial arts. So we have to have this hybrid, which again I like to refer to as the blends. And I think I've done a pretty good job in my tenure as an MMA coach of being able to adhere those all together. And yeah, it's been a learning process, but it's something that I've wanted for so long. So I do it every day with a smile.
Yeah, because what I've noticed is I've gone through some of your videos, and I noticed that you're very detailed with your explanations, and you're quite analytical with how you do things.
Yes.
So do you feel like, obviously there are coaches who haven't had MMA careers, but do you feel like because you had 30 fights and you have had to analyze and do that for yourself, that it's easier for you to do that now as a coach with your fight IQ?
Oh yeah, certainly. I feel like there are coaches that have been successful and they have not fought, but it's going to be like that with every sport. You can look at American football, you can look at the worldwide football, or anything. And so, but I do feel like for myself specifically, my path towards coaching, being a fighter first, helped me to understand, especially when it comes to weight cuts, especially when it comes to emotions that you feel during fight week and on fight day, and being there for my students and be able to talk them through and be like, this is normal. This is supposed to happen. You're supposed to want to feel like you're going to shit your pants 3 times a day, and like this is normal. Accept it. Just accept it. The quicker you can accept it, the easier it will be for you.
Yeah, and I guess like that holds a lot of credibility in itself, because I think that if a fighter's going through it and you, who's been through it, can tell them, hey, you need to suck it up or you need to do this, there's a lot more credibility than someone who hasn't done it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
And at the end of the day, I think that because you've done it, you can jump in to train with them as well. I'm not sure if you do, but You know, instead of just coaching, you can. Oh, you still like to get dirty on the mat.
Yeah, bro. Like I'm competing in a jiu-jitsu tournament next Saturday. Going for gold again. I've got won a lot of jiu-jitsu matches, and like I still compete. I still train regularly, and
that's awesome.
Now when it comes to like the teaching aspect, and I'm in the classroom setting, I don't normally get in there and go with my fighters. I want to be on the outside, doing the coaching thing and having that perspective. But let's say we have odd numbers and, you know, nobody really has a fight coming up. It's like, okay, coach can jump in and, you know, I'll put the gloves and shin pads on, throw the mouthpiece in and do some like kickboxing rounds or something like that with them.
Yeah. Awesome. So how do you feel like your fighters respond to that? Obviously they'll respond well to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of success with my fighters. Got a really nice record with my cornering, and I've built a name as a fighter first here, and then now as a coach, I've really made some noise as a young coach. And my fighters, whenever I'm able to work with them, because I still have that little bit of youth and stuff, and yeah, coach still has these hands. You know, coach can still kick your fucking head off. Like the respect is still there too, but I think it certainly helps the fighters.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think even though, you know, you're not professionally fighting MMA anymore, you're still developing and you're still competing in jiu-jitsu. So that's still, you're still, you know, working on yourself.
Yeah, you know, I actually joined a new jiu-jitsu program that's specifically all no-gi. It's 10th Planet. When I was at Genesis about a year ago, September of last year, there was some shit that went down in the gym, and I had to cut ties. I had to leave, unfortunately, not under my own choosing, but So with doing that, I had to go find another place to do jiu-jitsu as well. And so whenever the COVID restrictions were lifted here in Texas, which were a lot sooner than they should have been, I did go join up at 10th Planet North Dallas because I've always wanted to learn their system, and I'd built some pretty incredible ties with their coaches. Richie Martinez goes by Boogeyman, as well as Curtis Hembroff, who developed the 10th Planet Austin location. And so I always wanted to learn. I just didn't realize there was a 10th Planet here in this area that we live. And someone pointed me to it, and I was like, holy shit. So went and signed up and learning a new system, having a lot of fun with it. Now I get to go compete under their banner.
That's awesome. So is the competition that you're doing on Saturday, is that fully no-gi?
All no-gi. In my 15 years I've been doing this, I can count on my two hands how many times I put on a gi. And one of them was to go win a tournament in a gi. And I did really well, but I just used my wrestling and no-gi grips and stuff. I don't think that it transfers well into mixed martial arts. It certainly has its place, but I think that wearing the kimono is it's more about tradition. For sure. I'm a no-gi guy always. Yeah.
And that's what I find interesting, because obviously I come from a Japanese background because my mum's Japanese, so I grew up doing judo, and I still do judo. And I competed in a no-gi tournament this year, my first one. It felt like a foreign world.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You know, like, because in New Zealand, it's not like the States where you have wrestling growing up.
Right.
So obviously for you, wrestling's natural. So all you had to do was add submissions to it.
Yes.
Whereas for me, you know, my arms gave out. I was like, my hands were shaking. I was like, what the hell was this? But you put a gi on, and I'm like, okay, this is natural. I can do that. I can do this 4 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like you said, like it's all about specificity, right? So if you're going to be doing MMA, I reckon no gi and wrestling is the best way to go. Like you look at guys back in the day, obviously, you'll know Team Hammerhouse.
Yes.
Like they weren't the best technicians, but when you look at like wrestling fundamentals and how they use their wrestling to dominate their opponents, that was like a good example of how wrestling overcame a lot of different styles.
Yeah, certainly.
So when you work with a lot of the fighters now, do you have guys coming like off the streets as Joe Blogs, or do you have guys coming from collegiate wrestling backgrounds as well? How's it kind of work?
Yeah, I've had a nice array of both of those, of having guys that have pretty stout backgrounds already in one form or discipline. But I've also had some that come off the street and they're just like, I don't know anything, but I want to be a fighter. And it's like, hey, let's see if this is for you, and let's put in the work.
So in terms of, because I asked Dan Hooker this too, he said to me that the guys who you coach everything to from scratch are the easiest because they don't have any prior habits.
No poor habits. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So do you have like who was that guy that you put a post up with a couple of weeks ago who's undefeated?
Well, I've got a couple of them. Was he a bigger guy or a smaller guy?
Smaller guy. He's quite lean.
Tony Tran.
Yeah, I think that's him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my boy Tony Tone. So Tony had about 2 years worth of jiu-jitsu at Genesis, but when I started the program there at Genesis, he signed up, and but he didn't have any wrestling. He didn't have no kickboxing, nothing like that. And so for me, I got to develop him like that. And he had his first fight in autumn of last year, and he had a lot of trouble. He already had kind of a name going about him, A, being my fighter, but B, with jiu-jitsu. And so he probably had like 9 fighters pull out over a course of about 6 months and just could not get a fight. And then they offered us a guy who was 3-1 with 3 knockouts. And we're like, well, fuck, this guy's got some experience and nobody wants to fight him, but nobody wants to fight you, Tone. I was like, let's go get this dude. And ended up winning by first round mounted triangle TKO, just punched the guy's head in, and it was a flawless victory. So it was good to see that Tony was able to put everything together for his very first. Like he oozes with confidence. He calls himself Tony McGregor, which is fucking ridiculous. But or Tony Tiger Muay Thai McGregor. He's hilarious. He's a riot. One of my favorite personalities. But he's not short of self-confidence, and I freaking love that about him. But him being a small guy too, being a flyweight, he has become Jen's main training partner, especially over the
nice,
the COVID stuff. So yeah, he's my homie, little Tony Tone.
So how do you? My next question: how do you control guys with a lot of confidence in terms of how do you manage that as a coach so it doesn't get too out of hand?
Yeah, that because I have guys that come through, and they've got I'm the baddest motherfucker in the world mentality, and I don't want to squander that, but I do want to put things into perspective for them. And I do my best to do that because I want these fighters to be individuals. I don't want them to be 100% molded to be like me. Like I want you to have your own creativity, have your own ego, don't be an asshole, but you got to have some sort of an ego to be in the sport. And there's one kid that I specifically worked with for quite a long time. He's still a good friend of mine, but he relocated out to Greg Jackson's camp just recently. But he went 10-0 in Muay Thai and MMA as an amateur, and then we made a pro debut on March 6th this year, and now he's undefeated pro. But he's definitely one of those guys that I had to have a lot of talk with him because he's also very young, like 22, 23 years old.
Yeah.
But had to just have some things put into perspective for him. And I think it's worked. Like he's doing really well. Yep.
So I think my next question is kind of for both of you. So how do you manage all these fighters, be a head coach and look after your wife's career?
I'm the maestro. I orchestrate it all. I put it all together. I tell my fighters I'm the most versatile coach you'll ever have.
Yeah.
I have the ability to do it, and so I have the ability to be on my phone and answer questions at any given time of the day for my fighters. If they're freaking out a little bit, I have the ability to calm them down, But at the same time, I'm whipping up dinner for Jen. Like, all right, what are we eating tonight, Jen? Whatever you want, let's go get it. And
I mean, it does get a little bit like obnoxious because he like lives on his phone, and there's no time. Like I've talked to him about like you have to have set hours. Like if somebody's not in fight camp, like you have to have set hours because it doesn't matter if we're watching a movie together, we're having dinner together. Like he's always on his phone. He's like, oh well, so and so hit me up. I got to get back to them. I'm like, if it's not emergent, like you have to shut it down at like 9-10 o'clock. And after that,
don't worry, I get told the same thing too.
I'm like, you got to shut it down. Like they can't send you a text at 2 a.m. and you're on your phone, like responding to them, especially if it's not an emergency. You know, if they're not cutting weight, you know, if they're not trying to make weight tomorrow morning and need your help, whatever, like you got to shut it down.
Yeah. And she's right, because I with being a coach, there's a learning process, you know, that and each year you're able to be a little bit better, and you got to change things to do that. And that's one of those things where I did kind of hit the brakes a little bit and be like, all right, if it's a non-emergency and this fighter's hitting me up for some just something ridiculous that they can figure out themselves, I'm not going to pay attention to it until later on when I get some actual time. So Jen hit me up with that, like it made me take a step back and go, okay, yeah, you're right. I need to pick and choose the moments that I am speaking and responding to my fighters.
So for you, Jinh-Yu, like how are you able to switch on between fighter and wife?
I don't think I ever switch. I'm the same person.
You're both the whole time.
There's really no delineation.
Yeah.
If he doesn't make breakfast quick enough, I'm gonna have to drop the hammer, same as I would in the cage.
So I guess, yeah, my question for you, Jinh-Yu, is like, because Doug does so much, not only for you but for everyone, do you ever feel like, oh, he does so much for me, I don't know how to repay him?
Oh no.
You don't?
No, like, you know, she's. I know you had asked me, like, do I take like kind of the standard 10%?
Yeah.
From Jen. We've been together for 12 years, so and married for 8 of those. So I don't have to ask for anything like that because she's already done so much for me over that course of 12 years. I mean, back in 2011, for example, I'd never traveled outside the United States. Jen got me to get a passport. She had been to Kenya, she'd been to Fiji, she had traveled the world a little bit, and so I got a passport, and Jen bought us flights to Scotland and Ireland, the first countries that I went to outside of here. But what that did is that created kind of like this yearning to travel. I became very, very interested in it. So after a fight, Jen doesn't need to pay me any money. We book a trip and we go somewhere in the world. So
do you know how enriched his life is from being married to me?
It's true.
I mean,
like even her last Invicta fight, which was in February, we knew that we were going to have a little bit of downtime the first and second week of March. So Jen was like, "Hey, I booked us flights to Bolivia. Let's go climb some mountains." So it's like stuff like that. Like there's no reason for me to have a little cash on top of going and having world adventures.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's something that I've always struggled with when I do all my partners training and all those things like that. I always kind of think, okay, how do I make it even, or how do I balance it out?
Yeah.
Did that ever happen to you early on?
What's up?
Did that ever happen to you like early on when you first started coaching her?
no,
Not really, no.
and I mean, like I pay a lot of our bills. It's like it's never really an issue that comes up where he's like in need of money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, if it were an issue where he's like constantly like, oh, I need rent, I need money, or I'm not being able to meet this deadline or this debt, maybe it would be something different. But it's like we share the finances, they get covered. We take our trips, and if he needs something, we get it. If I need something, we get it. It's never really like I don't know, everything's taken care of, so it's never really come up.
And I guess like in order for all of that to happen, you guys have to have good communication, right?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously key to making a relationship work.
So Jin-Yu, like, do you ever feel like when you're in fight camp and Doug's got other fighters in fight camp that you're kind of having to fight for his time at all, or?
No, he's pretty good about making sure everybody's getting what they need. And a lot of times, if there's multiple of us in fight camp, a lot of times we all need the same thing. And he's making sure that he's meeting those needs, and we're getting in good hard training sessions. So I don't ever really feel like I get left out or whatever.
Yeah. So Doug, I guess for you, my question is, being so busy and having so much responsibility, not only with your wife, but so many different fighters, what do you do in a week to put aside time for yourself? Is that like your own jiu-jitsu training, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that's pretty safe to say is making sure that I'm still taking care of myself and and getting in when I can. But to be honest, like I don't really ever unplug from coaching until we go into the mountains somewhere and go off the grid for a couple of weeks. And that's when I'm just like, I'm not fucking talking to anybody. I'm unplugging from all of it and going to the mountains, like I said. But this is, like I said, this is something I've wanted for a long time and thought about and want to be successful in. So I know what it's going to take. And so I just don't ever unplug.
Yeah, and I guess what's interesting is before the UFC fight, you guys were out camping, right? Before you got the notice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess like, how did that all come about with the 6-day notice from the UFC to a multi-fight deal?
So I think we knew that after Jin fought in March that was likely her last time at 105. And she had stayed at 105, to win the world title, but there was always the rumor that the UFC may open up the atomweight division. So it was like, okay, if she's the Invicta champion, she's fighting for the UFC belt right off the bat if they ever start the division. So we just kind of held on to that for so long. And after her fight with Ashley Cummins in February, let her digest it and stuff. And then I guess it was only like 3 weeks ago, Jin made the conscious and said it out loud, like, I'm making the move to 115. It took a few months, and she finally said, that's what I'm doing. 105 is too hard. She goes, I've done everything that I can do in this division. She's become the greatest atomweight in the Western Hemisphere. And oddly enough, the Andrade and Namajunas fight got scratched in spring. And so I hit up, I told Jin, I was like, we're taking that fight against Andrade. It's a week notice. He's like, I'm going to put your name in the hat. And of course, Jin's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You get to go fight a number one contender fight right off the bat.
My wife and put her in a meat grinder. It's fine.
I was like, you can fight. You can scrap. You'll be fine. And so we hit up her manager, who hit up Mick Maynard, and of course nothing ever happened with that, but it got Mick's attention. And I fought for Mick when he owned Legacy Fighting Championships in Texas years ago. So he knows who I am. He knows who Jin is. We've had a friendship and a relationship for years. So that happened, and then so about 3 weeks ago, I got on the phone with Shannon Knapp. She owns Invicta, and let her know what the game plan was for us. And she, we actually asked to fight the 115 champion right off the bat, Kanako Murata. And we were told that she actually got signed to the UFC already, so that belt was going to be vacant. But there wasn't really another number one contender to fight Jin for that belt. So she offered us another fight, and we were kind of mulling that over the course of that weekend in the mountains on, are we going to take this fight, headline event July 30th? Yeah. And while we're in the mountains, I got into a pretty heated argument with one of the guys we were there with. over racism, and I had to stand up for my beliefs. So around 2 a.m. on that Saturday night, sitting around the campfire, and got into the argument, and I was like, I can't fucking take this shit. I didn't realize you were like that, and got a couple hours of sleep, but then packed all our shit up and started the 11-hour drive back home to Texas.
Jesus.
It was 11 hours, yeah, and we were about 8 hours in, and got a call from Jin's manager. What's her weight at? UFC wants her this Saturday, and so luckily it happened like it did, and also with that came the 4-fight contract. And they actually threw out a different name. They threw out a girl that's been fighting in the UFC for quite some time, and we were like, holy shit, okay, I guess we'll go fight Randa Marcos is who it was, and then within 20 minutes it was like, oh, she can't get a visa coming from Canada, and so we're like, well, fuck. That was like a big roller coaster of UFC wants you to, no, now you don't have a fight. But then they threw us Kay Hansen's name, and we had already been looking at her as a possible fight at 115 in Invicta. Knew she had some really good ground, and so it just happened to the dominoes fell as they were, and it's luckily we did, because we needed that next day to be home so Jin could start working on all of her medicals. And had we not, we would have still been in the mountains, would not have been able to get the medicals done, and that opportunity likely would have been passing by.
Jeez, talk about timing, right?
Yep.
So what was Jin's training looking like before you guys went out camping?
She'd do some kettlebell stuff. Here, I was doing pad work with her 3 times a week, 4 times a week, nothing like super crazy.
Like twice a week.
had a couple of her training partners come over, and I put them through the blends, but only like a handful of times. Like, she wasn't fight ready by any means, like not in fight shape, and we're not expecting to fight at any time. And so, but I guess about 2 weeks before, we did start ramping up the training a little bit. Like Tony was coming over. I was like, hey, we just got to get prepared, guys. We got to get back into this. I'm opening up my doors again August 3rd, so I need you guys to be in shape whenever we do that. And so we had loosely started putting it together, and then got the call.
Jeez, that's because what I found interesting was obviously what I said to you first in our call is, like, when people don't see the context of the whole situation, they only look at a couple minutes of a fight and start assuming. So I'm excited to see how you fight next time, Jin, once you've got a full fight camp and you're at fight fitness level and you're yourself, not after a 6-day, camping trip.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the fight week was so stressful for me.